Few leaders have faced a challenge in their career so severe, consequential, and unpredictable as COVID-19. Most leaders have understandably relied on pattern recognition and past experience, and they're finding that today's issues have very few comparisons. This period is a truly novel test of their leadership ability, and no one has any idea of how long it will last, or when and how it will end. To better understand what it takes for leaders to be successful in a post-COVID landscape, we at Russell Reynolds have spoken to some of the world's most notable chief executives, chairs, and board directors. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Crozier, who chairs two major businesses in the UK, the FTSE 100 Whitbread, which is a hotel and restaurant group, and the online fashion retailer, ASOS. We are focusing on two particular themes in our discussion. One is the impact of COVID on both his businesses and how that drives plans for the future. And secondly, the type of leadership requirements in chief executive, both now to navigate the crisis and for the long term. So Adam, what have been the main impacts to your markets in the longer term? And how and where do you see the opportunities developing?
I guess, as it will have been for everyone, a quite extraordinary time. I don't think any of us who've been on boards for many years will have really contemplated the idea of a total shutdown in the world's economy, a drop in economic activity of that rate over that shorter period of time, and almost a sort of total closing of business as we know it. So it's been extraordinary. I think what is interesting is that it has impacted all businesses, including those that have done better out of it. There have still been impacts there. And my two are no different. With Whitbread, obviously, FTSE 100 company, hotels and restaurants, a total shutdown. So a revenue base of absolutely zero. For a while, and that's quite something to contemplate. With ASOS, very different. Obviously, as a pure digital player, it has continued to do actually pretty well. But on the other hand, there have been huge impacts because of the need to social distance and what have you on warehouses and distribution, and keeping our people safe, and a lot of cost that has gone with that. So relatively, it's done very well, but not without difficulties. So I think there's two quite sort of extreme examples there. And, you know, I think for a lot of business people, and indeed individuals now, people are beginning to realize that in many ways the shutdown was the easy part. You know, that's a very clear instruction. Everybody knows exactly what they've got to do. Businesses moved into a typical sort of fighting mode of shutting things down, furloughing people, which I think was a very good scheme from the government, a protective scheme, and, you know, working from home. So all very clear and very quick. And that's because there's clarity around that instruction. Of course, as things have started to reopen, that clarity has gone. And, you know, in many ways where people are struggling, I think, particularly consumer-facing businesses, is around the fact that many of the business models don't actually work when you build in things like social distancing. So, for example, on Whitbread, we had a very long argument, discussion, debate with government around the differences between a 2 metre social distancing and a 1 metre. And frankly, it is a massive difference in terms of the impact on the business and your ability to get people through the door. So extraordinary time. And of course, what we don't know yet is what the medium to long-term impacts of this are going to be. You know, I think most people I speak to, and certainly my view as a pessimistic Scotsman, is that the hopes of a V-shaped recovery are virtually nil. I've certainly felt that almost from the start. And what we don't know yet is how some of these business models will work, how many companies will be forced into administration, the impact on jobs and therefore consumer spending, the impact on the way that people are now going about their working lives. Will they continue to work from home? What does that mean for city centres? Look at those, just by way of example, the companies that operate and service people in central London have seen drops in business of 90, 95%. Pret a Manger recently being a very good example of that, or difficult example of that. So I think we don't understand yet the impact of that. And, that also includes, how people will continue to will they continue to work from home? Some companies are talking about people not going back until January next year, possibly even longer. Some people are talking about this being a permanent change. So I think there's a lot of turmoil still to come and a much longer term impact on the economy, not to mention that, of course, all of this money will, of course, have to be paid back at some point. And whether that results in higher taxes or lower investment from government, either way round, that's an impact on the economy.
What role will technology play in all of this?
I think the interesting thing for me about the last few months is, in many ways, as often is the case, I think what it's done is accentuate and accelerate trends that were already there. And the use of technology is clearly one. Lot of reading online in any event, and that's probably been speeded up. I think some of it will go back to traditional retail, but I think there's no doubt that will speed it up. I think there are great swathes of the population out there, particularly, if no one minds me saying this, at the older end, who were perhaps a bit averse to using technology, have now been using it, realised it's not that difficult, and will continue to use it. Frankly, I think the ability of companies to get people to work from home without technology would have been impossible. You've seen the rise of companies like Zoom and the way Microsoft Teams and all of the other applications of similar kinds have come through. And they've been absolutely invaluable, actually, over the last few months. I'm not sure companies could have continued to run the way they have without those. So I think what it's shown everyone is a lot of those things are more possible than would have been believed. I don't think it will carry on entirely like that personally. I do actually believe that meeting in person is still hugely valuable. For anyone who's done these very long meetings on Zoom or what have you, it's very difficult to read the room on a computer, and so much of communication from all of us is in and around body language and the atmospherics in the room and all of those things, that I think there will be a return to some of that. But I do think there will be long-term impacts on the amount of, for example, business travel that takes place, because a lot of the meetings that happen, frankly, could happen in a much easier, cheaper, more cost-effective way. So I think technology has played a huge part. Thank goodness we were as prepared as we were. Most companies have managed through that pretty well. And again, I think that will have quite long-term implications.
Could you reflect on the critical characteristics in an effective CEO now and in the future, and what has changed?
Well, again, I think it's probably accentuated certain things. I mean, I was a CEO for 23 years across different companies, and I think it's always all about leadership. It's always about doing the right thing. It's always about good communication and building good teams and setting very clear strategies and all those things that everyone listening or watching this will know far better than I do, quite frankly. But I think the context has changed. I think it is more difficult than it has ever been. Dealing, the last few years has been a pretty steady, positive environment to operate in and to run a business in. And we're now going into a period where we have a recession, question around how deep and how long, but undoubtedly we're entering a pretty difficult recession. Most companies, I think pretty much every company now is going through some kind of transformation. I mean, there used to be CEO jobs out there, as you know better than I do, Julia, that people would have said this is a steady state company. There are no steady state companies today. So all companies going through transformation, that all companies will require right sizing. All companies are having to confront the need to adapt to the future now, to embrace technology now, to make it a core part of what they do. We are dealing with a situation where for CEOs, I think there is a lot of unknown information and incomplete data. We've had recessions, but not this kind. We've had drops in GDP, but not of this sort and this speed. And we're dealing with the fact that we don't know when this virus will come back. We don't know how long we'll need things like social distancing. So actually, for CEOs taking relatively quite big decisions on the basis of incomplete data, you need CEOs who have that clarity and bravery and courage, if you like, to set a course and then be aware enough to adapt that course as the world develops around them. So, you know, more flexible perhaps than ever before. And, you know, I think the implications that the CEO and the board and indeed the chairman are, there is a tendency sometimes for people at the top to feel that they have to portray this image of we have all the answers to everything. Actually, anyone right now that told me they had all the answers, I'd be quite worried about them, because I don't think anyone does, and I certainly don't. So actually what you want are people who are very open, very transparent, and are willing to adapt as they go and change plans based on the evidence that's around them. And rather than seeing that as a weakness, actually that has to be seen as a really positive aspect of people's character right now. And I guess that does take me on to that key word of character, which is, you know, these jobs are tough enough at the best of times, but they're really tough right now. And so I think you do need quietly strong characters who have the kind of courage to work through some pretty difficult issues and not try and be popular, but really focus on trying to see their company through and protect as many people as possible.
How has the crisis affected the type of board leadership that's required, and what is needed in the chairman of the future?
I think in the end, this is common sense, really. I think there's no doubt. I'm sure virtually every CEO out there who works with the chairman or chairman who works with the CEO, I think this has been a time of a lot more communication. I think most people have talked to each other, if not every day, not far off it. I think there's been a need to make sure everyone's involved and understands what's going on. I think the chairman is always there to help with counsel and advice, but never more so than at a time like this. Chairmen tend to be a little bit older, including myself, and therefore actually having someone there with more scars on their back, so to speak, who's been through a few of these difficult times is no bad thing, actually. Particularly for younger or first-time CEOs who are going through some of this for the first time. And I think that's a difficult time to be doing that. So I think really for boards, it's about being there for the team and helping them and advising them and encouraging them not to be too fixated on one answer, but to remain open-minded, but also doing that in a way that stays the hell out of their way and allows them to get on with a job that is now even busier than it was before. So it's just finding that balance of being there and being more involved on a more regular basis, but it not feeling like that, so that the teams have the time and the space to get on with what they need to do. So it's not just what you do, but I think how you do it as well. And what that does mean, finally, I think, funnily enough, is certainly I've found is actually changing the way you work. I've been speaking to my teams and companies every single day, but often at quite unusual times, because I'm trying to give them the free time when they need it to be doing what they want, and then trying to contact them in their quieter times. So, I think it does change some things, and I think giving a bit of air cover and staying close to all of the stakeholders, not just shareholders. And I suppose that's the last thing for everyone, including chairman, actually, is I think this has always been the case, but never more so now, that it is much more than just about shareholder value. I think how companies have behaved and will behave through this crisis will have an enormous impact on their long-term brand health, not just with the consumer, but with their employees and future employees as well. And I think the really good companies have recognized that. And I think we've seen some really good behavior. I think we've seen some changes to the positive in behavior. And I hope that continues, because if nothing else, business has gone through a pretty difficult public image over the last few years. There's been some difficult cases. But I think more than ever now, people will realize just how important business is to their lives and prosperity. And if this can change the behavior for the better and for the longer term, then it won't have been a wasted crisis.
Thank you, Adam. And I so agree. It's not just the what you do, it's the how you do it. And that will absolutely continue.